So, Brother John.
Brother John. It's time for Brother John.
Yes.
Well, it's a privilege to be here. So thank you, Jim, for the invitation to share. I've been doing this for 36 years, raising money for evangelism. That's a pretty crazy path. And I just want to say, kind of as we get started, that I deeply value like what you are called to in evangelism. And sadly, it is frequently not appreciated by the church. And it's hard. It's a hard path. And I know, getting invitations to do ministry can be a constant challenge. And also, cash. The money that fuels our calling is hard. I frankly think that's one of the reasons why people sometimes drop out. And so, we need to remember in that passage reminded us today that God is our provider.
Amen.
So we can rest in that and we can trust in that. But there's also things that we can do to be used in people's lives to help them unlock the blessing of fueling our ministries. And so, I'm prepared today to talk kind of in some big picture, some things in the morning, and then we'll get into some more practical, very specific things in the afternoon. And my hope is that, I read a great story. It's in a business book that I don't read very many business books. I should read more of them. But the name of the book was called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. And it's actually a great book about getting things done, and moving things forward within an organization. And the guy who I was reading the foreword to this book, and it was about this guy is a consultant to big corporations. And he was consulting with Intel, which is like one of the biggest corporations. And they had some business situation going on where they had some competitor that was coming into the market with cheaper chips, and they were trying to figure out how to deal with this. And the guy said, well, you should do this, this, and this. And the guy said, you idiot, I didn't consult it. I don't need to know what to do. I need to know how to do it. And so I want to try today to not kind of lay a bunch of what to do's on you. And then you leave here feeling like triple burdened because John just told me all this stuff I'm supposed to be doing, and I have no idea how to do it. Okay, I want to share what to do, but I also want to try to share how to do it. Okay, but before we get into that, I want to talk about why do it. Okay, and actually the why do it is the most important part of this entire day. If you get that, the rest of it will probably flow out of it pretty easily, because it is not rocket science. Okay, this is not, it's not all that complicated, though I think there are things about it that are mysterious. But anyway, that's my heart today. And we'll have a little bit of time tomorrow morning. We've got a flight around 5 tomorrow, so we're going to leave here about 11 tomorrow. So we've got today and a little bit of time tomorrow morning. So let me just kind of preview what we're gonna do like through this outline. And here's one thing I want to say right up front about this outline. We are not gonna go through all of this 100%, okay? There's more here than we have time to talk about, okay? So some people stress out about that. So I'm telling you right now, don't stress out about the fact that we're not gonna get through all this content, okay? It's in an order though, for a reason, because I think we're gonna touch on the most important stuffs first, and we're just gonna kind of walk through it, and as God gives us time to process it and do it, we will. So, Karen and I are gonna start by just talking about our call to evangelism and the role of fundraising kind of in our call. And I'm not going to do all the talking either. I'm going to make Karen do some talking because she has a unique perspective on this that actually I think could be much more relatable and relevant than some of the stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis with the Louis Palau Association. Then I'm going to preach at you a little bit about a biblical view of generosity, okay? And then I want to talk about just some principles that I think are universal. I mean, and this is exciting for me to have people not from the United States here. And the principles, I want you to challenge me a little bit, okay? If you feel like, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't work where I come from. Okay, let's talk about that, all right? I have a little bit of perspective on how some of this stuff plays out internationally, just through some of the things I've done with Palau. But the principles, if you understand the principles, you can adapt the principles into your culture. But then we'll kind of transition to development planning and practices. That's going to be more about methods and some tangible things that you can do. This is more what and how, okay? We're going to get into that. And then we'll probably finish out with some stuff about how to meet with major donors and foundations, or at least just make one-on-one presentations of our ministry, because that's a very important skill for us to have, and that's a very important element to our success. So that's kind of where we're going.
Wonderful.
So I wanted to walk you through that. And so let's turn to, I got through my bio in there, which I even updated for this meeting, so you can see a little bit of my background. But I'd like to just lead us in prayer again before we dig into like kind of our first session together. So let's pray. Father, Lord, I just thank you for the calling that you've put on our lives to share the good news of Jesus. And Lord, this issue of funding and fundraising is an important part of our ministry. And so, Father, I just pray that you would use me today to share practical things that could be applied in every single ministry represented here to help them fulfill their calling to reach even more people with the good news of Jesus. So Lord, guide our time together and guide this session in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So, yeah, just a little bit of background on me. I was not raised, since we're going to spend 12 hours together, you might as well get to know me a little bit right off the top here, but I was not raised in a Christian home. And always was interested in spiritual things. And my senior year of high school, I got invited by a guy on my football team to go to a Wednesday night gathering at a community center down the street from my high school, where they were listening to audio cassette tapes. Some of you don't know what those are, but we were listening to these audio cassette tapes, and it was a guy who had played pro football for the Oakland Raiders. pastor. His name was Ray Schmatz. I don't know if you know this guy. You know, yeah, you know who he is. Okay. Just a sidelight. I got a hold of him last year and got to tell him God used his story to change my life. That was cool. He works in reaching out to. He's like a military chaplain in Colorado now. So that was cool. But anyway, he talked about you could have a personal relationship with God, and you had to ask Jesus to come into your life, and that sounded right. But I thought, I'm going to do that someday. First time I'm going to go off to college and have a good time and get all the stuff I want, and then I'm going to do that. Football ended, the group ended, and I started reading the Bible for the first time in my life, the New Testament of the Bible. And I got to Matthew 7, and it said, Jesus was speaking, paraphrasing. He said, "Not all who say to me, Lord, Lord, will I allow into my presence, but to some I'll say, depart from me, I never knew you." That got my attention. Because I knew I hadn't gone forward and done the one thing I knew you were supposed to do, which was to ask Jesus to come into my life. And so I did that by myself. I asked Jesus to come into my life, and I knew something had happened. And then I started getting involved in a church. The guy who kind of was the instigator of this group, and I both played in an all-star football game that summer. And so I started with him when I come back from first practice. You know that prayer thing that you talked about? I did that. Okay. She comes through. And then I went off to college, and the pastor of this church said, "You should get involved in Campus Crusade for Christ." And he lined me up with a Campus Crusade for Christ staff guy, very first day of school. And I immediately got very involved in Campus Crusade. Did that for 4 years. Ended up going to work for Campus Crusade for Christ at their headquarters after I graduated from college. And they placed me in this, I could have done anything. Could have worked on the grounds, I could have cleaned toilets, I could have done whatever. They put me in this thing, Office of Development. It was the part of the Campus Crusade for Christ ministry that was responsible for telling the story and raising the funds to fuel the ministry. And my very first job there was on the telephone. They had just bought this automated telephone system. It had 8 different phone lines that came into it. It was run off of a computer. And it had 8 tape decks that were connected to it, okay? And then there was a little thing that had 4 computer monitors where 4 people would sit with a headset. And you would load in on a floppy disk a list of donor names and hit go. And it would start dialing numbers. And my screen would light up, and it would say, ding, and it would say, Mr. Brad Butcher. And I would say, "Hey Brad, this is John Ogle with Campus Crusade for Christ. I've got an exciting message for you from Bill Bright and Roy Rogers. Would you have a moment to listen?" Roy Rogers was a very famous, Western cowboy, that was a Christian, well-known guy.
Very famous. He was the most famous. I grew up with him. I had a lunch pail with Roy Rogers and Dale Evans on the
Guy was legendary. So most people that we were calling would say yes. And I hit click. And a voice would come on, "Hi, this is Bill Bright. I'm Roy Rogers, and we've got a lot of exciting things to tell you about the Jesus film." Jesus film is touching lives all over the world. In fact, every day, 300,000 people are hearing the good news of Jesus. Isn't that exciting, Brad?
Yeah.
Good, it worked.
Hello? He's still there now.
Anyway, at the end, it was, Dr. Bright would say,
Pre-recorded?
all this stuff was pre-recorded. This was interesting.
High tech in the
It was in 1982,
1982.
okay, and
Were you
and then at
alive
the end of the
then?
recorded message,
Floppy disk.
it would say, and this is like about a 2-minute message, and at the end of that, then Bill Bright would say, one of my associates is gonna come back on the line and talk to you more about your partnership with this project. Beep. Wasn't that exciting, Brad? Yeah. Would you like to give? And I would just talk to people all day long about supporting the ministry. Like 7, 8 hours a day. I would talk to like 60 to 80 people a day. And I was good. I ended up being pretty good at that, you know. It wasn't anything I would ever have pictured for myself. And I would say, like, after a few months of it, you know, the fun is kind of fading a little bit. But then they moved me kind of into more administrative roles. And back then, at Campus Crusade for Christ, we had, at our peak in that office, we had over 110 people that worked on fundraising.
Wow.
And we were raising about $100 million a year. And after doing this for a while, I was introduced to a couple of guys who Campus Crusade had hired to help give them guidance on their fundraising strategy. Bill McConkey and Larry Johnston, super smart guys and very godly guys. Bill has been a pastor of a Presbyterian church in St. Louis, Missouri for over 50 years. And back then, Campus Crusade, well, Dr. Bright had a vision, he felt like from God, that he was going to raise $1 billion for evangelism. And he had a very simple strategy. He was going to find 1,000 people that would each give him $1 million. And, you know, I always laugh and say it was really a miserable failure. Like he only raised like $270 million. And that was when I left. And you know, it still goes to this day. There are flaws in that strategy, and I'll talk about some principles that relate to that later. But I got to be around that. I got to see like people that had big vision and what vision can mean, and that the money is out there, that people will give and give happily to kingdom stuff. And Campus Crusade began to kind of change its sort of structure around fundraising. Right around when I was there, the guy that was my boss left Campus Crusade. I moved up into his slot. But Campus Crusade was, instead of having one large centrally fundraising operation, they were disseminating it to all the individual ministries, which Campus Crusade has like 28 different U.S. ministries. So every one of them was setting up their own fundraising operation. I had some opportunities to move there, but I got approached by a ministry in Columbus, Ohio. It was a 70-year-old Bible distribution mission called Bible Literature International. And they were looking for a director of development. And so I said, yes, I'll move to Ohio and do that. Karen and I had been dating. Karen worked for Campus Crusade for Christ in their music ministry. So we met out there, but we weren't ready to get married yet. So off I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I worked for them for 8 years. And they were funded mostly by small gifts, which was mostly brought through the door via regular mailings to people. So I learned a lot about that. I mean, it was so tight that like if this mailing doesn't work well, we might not get paid. Okay, so thin margins And they never had any kind of major gift fundraising. So that was what I kind of brought to them, was raising money from major donors and foundations. Karen and I got married after 3 years of long distance dating. I ended up getting a master's degree in business administration with an emphasis in marketing from Ohio State University while I was working full-time. It was a Saturday program. So I did that, and then I was ready for more challenge after kind of on the backside of that. And I got a packet of information. Well, actually, I began to get approached by these different executive search firms that organizations would retain to recruit leadership. And I got invited to apply for the Director of Development position of a mission agency called Far East Broadcasting Corporation, FEBC, out of La Mirada, California. And I went through that process with them. They offered me the position, and after Karen and I really prayed about it, we said no. Just doesn't seem like a good fit. And I was reluctant to tell the recruiter, no, because I've gone all the way through the process with him. And I told him that, and he said, that's okay, I think I'm gonna get the Luis Palau search, and I think you'd be perfect for that one. I said, okay. And he did, and I thought very highly of Luis. The ministry that I was with in Ohio had for decades supplied literature for Luis's international crusades. So I had met Luis through that. I had read one of his books like the first year out of college, The Schemer and the Dreamer by Luis Palau, The Life of Joseph. And so I went through a similar process, and they offered me the opportunity to come to Ohio. This time Oregon. Karen and I said yes. And we had a 6-month-old child, and the offer was like in probably November of '93, and we moved out there and started the 1st of February 1994. So that was where I met Tim Rodnett.
Say yes, Jamaica.
Yeah, I think you might have just been finishing that or something. It was right after that.
Yeah, Valentine's Day, 1994.
Okay, yeah. So you were there. I was probably finding my desk at that point. And so yeah, I've been at Palau now over 25 years, and it is an interesting thing to kind of like reflect on that. Fundraising can be hard, and it's pretty rare to have somebody that would stay in one role for that long. And so that's sort of what I want to reflect on this outline here today, are just some of the lessons that I've learned from 25 years of doing this. And I think mindset, theology about giving, and our calling is the most important thing about how to survive 25 years in fundraising with one ministry. And the first point I would say is that giving is good. In fact, giving is great. And inviting people to give to our ministry is very, very important. Giving is a win-win-win-win-win proposition. I mean, think about this. Like, who wins when someone gives to your ministry? Who wins?
The kingdom and.
The kingdom wins. Yes. Who else wins?
Well, hopefully,
The giver wins.
hopefully the people we minister to.
The people that we minister to wins. Yeah. Everybody wins. Yeah. I don't see a loser here. I mean, the scripture teaches that it is more blessed to give than to receive. So the donor definitely wins because they get the joy of investing in the kingdom and the fruit of the ministry. That's credited to them. They get the joy of that. Well, our organization wins because we got to have the financial resources to actually function. So the organization wins. The beneficiary of your ministry, those people that were dead and now have life because they've met Jesus, they've definitely won big. And the kingdom wins. Because this is how God's kingdom is supposed to function. I don't see a lose here. So we have to get that like really straight in our mind. That when we're inviting people to invest in our ministry, we're unlocking wins all over the place. Okay? That's important for us to understand it. And I read a book, it was actually kind of a webinar that a guy did from his book, and the book was called The Sower. This is a good guy. And it's sort of like a fundraising book, but it's the concept is, you know, you just sow, you sow, you sow, you sow, you sow into everybody. And it's like, well, what about reaping?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
And I think there's sort of this thing that's kind of like creeps into our thinking, and that it's somehow like evil to be asking people to give and to be inviting people to participate in our ministries. That somehow like building into their lives and sort of like trying to disciple them and teach them is sort of good, but like inviting them to invest is somehow not good. And life is not one-dimensional. You know, we should be, I think about it more like being a farmer. We sow and we reap, okay? And we need to get out of this thinking that, you know, it's somehow adversarial when we're inviting people to invest in our ministries. As Luke mentioned last night, you know, it really is about real friendships with people. I had a dinner in Grand Rapids, Michigan, like maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago with a lady that I've known for 20 years who is the kind of the executive director of, there's a family there, the DeVos family, very wealthy family that founded Amway Corporation, and she manages their charitable foundations. And so I met her and her husband for dinner when I was back there 6, 7 weeks ago. And it was just a really wonderful time, and we were talking about life, you know. And she said as we walked out, you know, in the parking lot after the meeting was over, like she said, yeah, I told some of the people in the office that I was going to dinner tonight with John Ogle. And they said, isn't he a fundraiser? And she said, yeah. But it's real. Like, it's a real friendship. And I think we need to, I completely embrace my calling in raising funds for the kingdom. And I think I want to encourage you to embrace that, to not feel like it's a necessary evil, that it's somehow doing something that people don't want to do, you know, trying to get them to do something they don't want to do. Be proud of it and do it, and do not kind of think of it like as some kind of inferiority complex. Like some people think, oh, this guy thinks I'm going to come and ask him for money. Well, you know, you care about the person, it's a real friendship. But, you know, if we're helping them engage in God's work, that's unlocking blessing in their life.
Yeah.
You know, like that story, Luke, that you guys shared last night about that donor that gave $300,000 to help make this place happen and is now with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
He is so thankful he made that gift.
Yeah.
If you hadn't persisted in getting him out here, that wouldn't have happened. And that, as he broke down and cried, you know, that was expressing like the meaning that we deliver to people as they partner financially in our work. You know, so I see myself, yeah, I'm a fundraiser, but I'm unlocking blessings in their life. So we have to get this straight in our minds. And if you can't, we had a guy at Palau that was a festival director for a season. And we shifted him into the development department, and he could never get past this idea that this person knows I want money, therefore it kind of created this negative loop like in his head. Like he couldn't get past the fact that no, this is like a real relationship that we have with people. And we're not trying to get them to do something they don't want to do. And he just couldn't get past it, the loop in his mind. It was never going to work, and it didn't work, and it won't work. So the number one thing for success is this mindset, theology around our calling. The second thing would be relationships, and you know, life is about people. And here's a giving principle that you'll hear zillions of times, but people give to people, justified by the cause. So to be successful in this work, it helps if you are a people person. But you do not have to be a people person, because I am not a people person. I am more of an introvert than I am an extrovert. I'm not energized by being in groups of people and just, I can't wait to just go socialize and, you know, and I'm sure Reed's the exact opposite. You know, and that's good. We're all made differently, right? You know, but so we can be successful, you know, in different ways, but it helps if you're a people person, because this is about relationships. Relationships are what it's about. So we have to invest in relationships. And another thing that I think has been a sort of a natural skill that I have, and I think I'm really good at being able to focus, like when I'm in a dialogue with someone, about listening really actively. So that somewhat, I think, comes from God, but, you know, just kind of perceiving sort of like where people are at. That's a part of this work, is kind of understanding what people are thinking. So Reed said he can read minds, you know, yesterday. So he's way ahead of us, you know. Once you get that down, you'll be really good at this work of helping people find where they're going to plug into the ministry. But listen actively to people. I think that's really an important part of building relationships. And
well, and also, John, just a comment, that also is where sometimes you don't ask, I would think, because you get some sort of feedback, because they see you as an alternative pastor. So if they're going through a struggle, you know, it's a time to pray with them.
Oh, definitely.
Or try and minister to whatever is they're hurting over. And I've seen times where I've done that, didn't ask, didn't even bring anything up.
Sure.
Because of listening. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, a gift arrives.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But that's not the intent. The intent is
right.
it's the relationship.
It's the relationship,
ministry.
that's right. And, yeah, and I think, there are many times where, people will maybe open up to us about stuff that they might not open up about to their pastor.
You know, that's one of the things that astonishes me. A donor, and we were just sitting in his backyard on lawn chairs, and he tells me a story. I've been molested as a teen, or a young boy. And I drive away from there and say, you know, I bet he's never told anybody that in his life, so why me? And I kind of understand it, you know, I'm safe. I'm getting in the car and I'm driving 100, 200 miles back home, and I'm not gonna go
Talk about
talk
it, yeah.
about it with somebody that he knows.
We trust you, yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. Success. It's not about the money. It is easy. There's not that much in kingdom stuff that's all that quantifiable many times. I guess, you know, like when we're doing evangelism, crowd estimates, and those are, they're almost always estimates. And they go all over the place, and we've reined ours in a lot at Palau. Crowd estimates, I guess there's decision cards, you know, but sometimes it's quantifiable. But this part of our work, you know, it's kind of easy to kind of make it about the money. It's not about the money. It's about doing the right things. And, you know, it's about blessing donors. It's about feeling good about how you communicated your ministry and how you invested in people's lives. The end of the year is a busy time when you have this calling, because at least in this country, you know, a lot of people's giving decisions are made in December. We have a tax system in the United States where if you give by December 31st, you can deduct that gift on your taxes for that year. And so that's kind of a hard deadline that forces people to act. Plus you have Christmas, the Christmas giving spirit. A lot of people decide in December, so we're very busy in December. And what I, you know, preach to my team and I preach to myself is I want to be able to kind of, you know, flick the light switch off on December 31st and be able to just kind of say, yeah, I did what I needed to do there. Now, there's nothing that we can do to make people give. That is the Holy Spirit's job. Okay? But we can present the need. We can be involved in their life. We can ask them, we can challenge them to give. But at that point, once we've done that, we've done our part. You know, I stole Bill and kind of twisted Bill Bright's definition for successful evangelism and successful fundraising. Successful fundraising is sharing the opportunity and a challenge to invest in our ministry in the power of the Holy Spirit and leaving the results to God. You've heard that before?
Question, so, as a pastor and evangelist, when people give, I don't know, is it the same? Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious, but I know when people give, I know how much they give. It's been one of those things where I haven't even touched saying anything, because I've always pushed this about you and God. But am I looking at it wrong? Should I say something especially when a giver doesn't necessarily go to the church, but they give? Should I be saying, hey, I saw that you gave something, or is that intrusive?
When you have people in your church that are doing great things for God, you want to encourage that?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't see it as any different you know, I think it is it's an opportunity to affirm, and I think people like to be affirmed. So I would encourage you to do it, but I understand, I fully understand sort of the pastoral, kind of like there's sort of a historic thing about that, but I personally would like to blow that up. I would say, you know, why wouldn't you want to disciple your people into greater depth of giving? That's for some people, this is their unique like gifting. God's entrusted them with resources to be able to give it, you know, generously to further kingdom stuff. That's huge. So to be able to acknowledge that and to affirm that and to build on that and to thank that, you know, so I've got a whole thing in here we'll touch on about, you know, saying thank you to our donors. I think that is a real opportunity. And, you know, so, but yeah, I understand the historic kind of thing, within the context of the church, many times, like my pastor doesn't know. You know, doesn't know. And I think that's wrong. I think if you're a pastor, you should know.
But if you look from the perspective of, like, if somebody's really serving in the church, you're
Right.
gonna say, wow,
Right.
thank
That's what
you
I'm
for
saying. Yeah.
serving, this is awesome,
Mm-hmm.
and this is just another way of serving.
Yeah, that's the way I view it.
Thank you.
There are, another kind of window into success is when you see there are people that care more about our ministry than we do. And I've seen that. You know, Karen is on this National Women's Prayer Team at Palau. I mean, these ladies, they invest hours praying for different, you know, divisions of the ministry and geographies and things. I mean, it's awesome. I've had people stand up in small donor gatherings and talk about how their partnership with Palau is the most meaningful thing in their life. So when you're kind of trying to kind of evaluate success, if we're engendering that kind of commitment in our ministry, that feels like success to me. You know, again, the success not being about the money it's a very weird part of the kingdom, okay, this work that we do. We had, it's always kind of a big prayer season for Palau, like in this final like month of the year. We kind of do a special emphasis of praying for our partners and for the financial provision for the ministry. And there was a year where, a couple years ago, where, you know, it was going to be really, we needed a lot of prayer to kind of like get to the finish line. And God did it like big time, like he went beyond the finish line. And so, you know, we had like staff meeting in the first week in January or something, and Kevin Palau, my boss, says, hey, John, step up there and tell everybody like how God provided and how it worked and everything. And so
New York, right? Was after.
it was maybe like the year after, 2 years after, or something like that. And so I got up and I did, you know, and we all praised the Lord and everything. But it's like, well, what if the money hadn't come in? Would you've asked John Ogle? I would not have done anything different. So this is where it gets kind of like weird sometimes. You know, making it all about the cash, the money. Do the right things, and be satisfied, having done the right things before the Lord, and then trust Him to provide. And so I like to think that, you know, I mean, I still want to see the number hit, you know, at the end of the year, obviously, and I do rejoice in that. But I try not to let my joy kind of be based on what the checkbook balance is and what's going, and because it goes, I've had good years and really bad years, and there's things that you can control and can't control, and the Spirit moves people to actually do this. So focus on doing the right things. That's what success looks like. Training, counsel, and learning. I've always had the blessing of being around people that were smarter and more experienced than me and that have spoken into my life. So those two guys that were at Campus Crusade back in the day, I still go see that pastor in St. Louis probably 4 or 5 times a year. And I'll spend a whole day with them. And the ministry pays for that. And I get the benefit of his wisdom and insight into my life. I'll be doing that again next Friday. I'll be in St. Louis meeting with this guy. So I've had a lot of benefit from that. Listening to guys speak on Christian fundraising. I've done a lot of that over the years. I got my MBA in marketing, that helped. I try to be consistently learning and having people like that in my life. Number 5, value and expectations. Me being here at Palau for 25 years says a lot about the ministry. It says a lot about Luis, and it says a lot about the board, because it's really rare. It usually blows up. And it often blows up because of crazy expectations. And there's one huge advantage about me working at Luis Palau Association, and that was Luis and Pat Palau were missionaries. They raised their personal support one by one by one, speaking at churches, speaking at little dessert fellowships in people's basements. Luis understands that fundraising is not big, easy, fast money, that it takes time. And that we've always had reasonable expectations. When I did my interview with some of the board members before I was offered the position at Palau, I asked them what would success look like for me in the first year. And they said, integrity. I said, okay, I can do that. It wasn't about hitting a multiple of your salary. And man, I cannot tell you the number of things I've bumped into where boards or executive directors of organizations set these crazy expectations when they bring like a development person into the team. It's like, multiples of their salary within 12 months, with virtually no pre-existing relationships. You've got it all created from scratch. I mean, that's not reasonable. So I have been the recipient of reasonable expectations and an organization that values fundraising. That's a good situation.
It's pretty commendable. 25 years, that's huge. I mean, people always say the development director and youth pastor are about the same amount of time. They still last very long. And so I think obviously it's a great testimony to you and how God's wired you. And obviously, like you said, with Luis, you guys have been a good team for a long time now with Kevin and Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
Very commendable. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah,
John,
thanks,
what you're
Reed.
doing.
Appreciate
Seriously.
that.
Youth pastors and development directors, man, it's like 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, they used to say like it was 18 months,
Yeah.
was the typical tenure of a development
Yeah.
person. They'd be in and, it figured out that this person wasn't qualified or didn't have the right makeup or whatever, and they'd show the door, and a revolving door, and another one come in. And another thing that is good, if you're doing this kind of work, is to underpromise and overproduce. And so, if you're, trying to set a budget or setting a fundraising budget to a board, I would, set it at a reasonable level and then trust God to bring in beyond that. And that puts a smile on everybody's face. So under promise, over produce. And just for me, I tend to be a person of faith. I believe that we can. And Palau has very rarely ever done any kind of real serious fundraising campaigns, like for buildings and things like that. Sometimes they'll actually sort of test the feasibility of these things by interviewing people ahead of time about the idea and doing this kind of stuff. We never do any of that. In fact, when I arrived at Palau, literally like the first week, it was like, hey, we found this new building that we need. We were in this converted church and it wasn't a great setup, for Palau. And I was like, well, sometimes you do like a study and say, can we raise $3 million or whatever it was, $2 million to do it? But so our annual budget right back then was $3 million and we needed $2 million to do the building. And it was like, no, we're just going for it. It's like, okay, well, I felt great, going for it. And I knew that it wasn't going to be based on me. It was going to be a real indicator of the quality of the relationships that Luis and the team already had with people. And what was beautiful was Luis had done very little real serious asking of people to give. And literally by December of that year, we had every penny we needed to do the building. So I tend to say, let's go for it. Yeah, New York City was the biggest thing that we've ever done, and we thought we started at $5 million. We thought, wow, that's like almost twice what we've ever raised in any U.S. city to do a campaign. And the donors basically said that you're thinking way too small. You can't possibly do something that big. And it ended up being $13 million that we raised to do a campaign in New York City over about three or 4 years of fundraising. But loyalty, I have been the recipient of a lot of loyalty from the organization. I had both my parents pass away in different seasons. My mom in 99 and my dad in 2009. And my mom lived mostly in Southern California. My dad lived in Southern California, and there were seasons there where I had to go, and I'm the only child. So Luis and Kevin just said, go do what you need to do. There's no no qualms about it. It was just like, hey, go do it. They knew, I'd kind of proven myself at that point. So I kind of had a relationship that allowed me to be able to do that. But that delivers a lot of loyalty. And, my mom came to Christ through our ministry. I mentioned that I was not raised in a Christian home, and I prayed for my mom for 21 years. And I tried everything in the book, to share the gospel with her. And we used to do a part of our U.S. ministry called Night Talk with Luis Palau, where he would, we'd buy a week of an hour a night on late night television, and we'd set up Luis would have a desk, a phone, his Bible, a cup of coffee, and turn on the cameras and say, hey, if you're watching and you've got spiritual questions, I'd love to help you. Give us a call. And we did that in Portland, Oregon in 1999 when we had our festival there. My mom was living there, and she watched all week of that. And Luis will almost inevitably every night, just be talking to people who made bad choices. And he'll share the grace of God with them. And then it'd lead him to Jesus. He did that all night, all week long. And I called her on the Friday and said, would you come to, to invite her to come down to the park? She said, nope, don't need to do that. But you tell Luis he did a good job on TV and you tell him I prayed with him. I said, Mom, that's awesome.
That's great.
And I went to see her the next day and she was like a totally changed woman. She was like, wow, feels so good to know I'm going to heaven. And, I have all these questions. It's like, where have you been, And she died 2 months to the day that she accepted Jesus. She knew she had cancer about 5 years previous, and I think that was part of her, like realizing, hey, I gotta get serious here. And she really changed. She was a pretty wild lady in some ways, She drank and smoked a lot, and they'd kind of done life her way, and she'd been married multiple times. And the last one, I think the guy cheated on her, and she really changed. Like she kind of got real inward and just kind of insulated herself from life. One of the things that she cut out of her life was music. I think because music makes you feel things, and so she stopped listening to music. And after she met Jesus, she wanted love songs, and so this, I remember some friend of hers had sent her all these tapes of like love songs and all this stuff. It was just a beautiful example of like the change that God had done in her life. So anyway, you talk about loyalty. That's important. In 1996, we had there was a big thing going on in the charitable world. It was called the Foundation for New Era Philanthropy. And it was this thing where, this is like, okay, warning, like, I'm giving you the warning signs right here. It's kind of exclusive, like you have to be invited to participate in this. Okay, it's not open to just everybody.
It's a country club fundraising.
And the way it worked was there were these anonymous donors.
That's more red flag number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would match your giving. And the organization had to go out and to enlist new or upgraded money and then place it with them in this quasi-escrow account. There's no such thing as a quasi-escrow account. If it's quasi, that's not escrow. And so, a lot of big organizations were participating in this. We had some board members that were on boards of or participating in these other bigger ministries. And the McClellan Foundation, who's like a big name in Christian giving, like they were very big in endorsing this thing. And so, I went to Philadelphia and met with this guy, and I took a board member with me. And we came back and presented it to the board, and one of the board members said, this is a Ponzi scheme. But the other board members said, nah, let's do it. And so we did it. So we had $1 million in these quasi-escrow accounts. And we were supposed to get our first $500,000 matched, so this would have been $1 million payout in about 2 weeks. And on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is the Foundation for New Era of Philanthropy is imploded. It is a Ponzi scheme, just like this guy said, and the money is gone. And this was back when our ministry's annual budget would have been probably like $4 or $5 million a year. And so we very quickly tightened the reins at Palau. Like anything that was sort of marginal, we stopped doing. Like you remember, we used to have a US radio program that was on like a zillion of these Salem broadcasting stations. But we were paying, we sort of had this weird deal that preceded me, but anyway, we stopped doing some of that. We had to shrink our staff a little bit. and we just kind of hunkered
What year
down.
was that?
96.
Oh, you're only there 2 years, huh?
Yeah, so I've only been there 2 years, and I was kind of labeled with this a little bit, though I think they realized it was the board, but anyway, just to show you how God can bless out of something like that, there's a group called the ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, and one of their board members got appointed a trustee over this thing. And basically, any groups that had gotten, like, made good, more than they should have gotten, they had to give all the amount that they got, more than they put in, they had to give it back. And eventually, after like 2 or 3 years, we got 92% of our money back, while reducing the expenses of the organization and not expecting to get that money back. And so, for the first time in the history of the Palau team, we had a reserve. It was like $900,000. We still have that reserve to this day. That was the thing that God used to actually get a reserve. Because I don't know if you guys have this experience, but in most of my experience in evangelistic ministries, you spend it as fast as it comes in, pretty much. Okay, we got programs and needs, and so we're going in. Anyway, loyalty through that. Definitely there have been times where I wanted to quit. I mean, it's just combinations of things, you know. And it's good to have friends and family that can kind of talk you down from that. So, if you haven't thought about quitting, you will.
It's the old one stress-free Christmas, right?
Yeah, so I'm just telling you, you know, like, and I think just part of my DNA is like, there is a loyalty, like, big time loyalty, like Gene or whatever. So, you know, that's part of why would I last 25 years? Well, part of it is that loyalty gene that I have.
John,
Yes.
can I, and I don't want you to go further than you want to, but what were kind of the general reasons that were pushing you to raise that question, should I quit? And what was it that caused you to stay?
I think, I can't remember. I mean, I remember like in Bill McConkey's basement, this pastor of mine.
Oh, yeah.
He's kind of like a safe kind of person I can go talk to.
Thought you mean
And I was just like, yeah, I'm done, Bill. I'm out of here, you know, or whatever. And he was just kind of calmly, you know, not getting crazy, you know, just calmly kind of settling me down. It probably was interpersonal more than anything, you know, like just feeling unsupported, or like this is just, I'm not feeling the love here. You know, I mean, it might have had something to do with the maybe the focus a little bit. I mean, we got a little wobbly there for a while. About our kind of like evangelism first focus. Kevin would admit, you know, that sort of like there were, you know, fresh ideas that were sort of like we were becoming sort of so more service oriented than we were evangelism oriented.
Yeah.
And that's not my vibe. I mean, I'm all for serving, but
Right.
I'm more about evangelism first, and so might have had a little bit to do with that as well.
So it's kind of a mission drift issue.
Could have been, yeah. You know, just those are some things that I know percolate.